Well, many of us have been wondering what's going on with Batman, and we're not talking about the Matt Reeves version. When James Gunn announced the new DCU, one of the first projects he told us about was The Brave and the Bold. But there have been an absolute swirl of rumors, speculation, and false reports sort of surrounding this project and what's going on, the possibility of Pattinson being part of the greater DCU, and an exorbitant amount of confusing details. So we're going to take a couple minutes to talk about what Andy Muschietti himself has had to say about all this, and what we think is actually going on with Batman, The Brave and the Bold. Well, if many of you remember, the news that Andy Muschietti would direct The Brave and the Bold came along shortly before The Flash raced into theaters. Now, honestly, James Gunn said The Flash was a great movie, and it wasn't. And this led to a lot of concern. Now, to give Muschietti some credit, the best parts of that movie was Michael Keaton returning as Batman and the Batman scenes. So it does feel like the director does understand The Dark Knight and how to bring him to life in live action. Now, recently there have been a lot of reports about the potential for Pattinson being the DCU Batman, as well as when this movie will go into production. So we're going to talk a little bit about both of them, and we'll start out talking about Pattinson. Now, this ongoing story that Robert Pattinson could be the DCU Batman has never made any sense to me. It's always been super clear he's part of Matt Reeves' greater crime-verse world. And as I've said many times, I simply don't believe you can get Robert Pattinson to commit to playing the character every 12 to 18 months over the next 6 to 10 years. This is something that's going to be key for James Gunn casting the major members of the DC universe. And if you can't get him in front of the camera, they're not going to be a good fit. Now, there was a ton of reports suggesting recently that Pattinson was going to be the DCU Batman, and Andy Muschietti chimed in directly, making it very, very clear that that was not going to happen and that they would have their own casting for the character. Additionally, given some details that came out in a recent episode of Creature Commandos, well, we found out this version of Batman has been operating for 10 to 15 years. So, as James Gunn said, this will be a somewhat older version of the character, at least in his mid-30s, and will have a full, fleshed-out history, complicating the idea that Pattinson is that version, and honestly, the silhouette we got looked nothing like the Pattinson version of The Dark Knight. Now, there are some points of concern here. And recently, Andy Muschietti was doing an interview, Radio 2, a Spanish podcast, and seemed to give some indication that there is something going on behind the scenes that might not be good. He did say in that interview that they had had conversations with James Gunn about the story concept. But my big red flag was that he pointed out that he hadn't talked to Gunn since before Superman began filming. This was more than 10 months ago. So I am a little bit concerned that Muschietti might actually be out leading the Dark Knight inside the DCU. Now, to be fair, they're in no rush for this project, because in a separate interview, Muschietti pointed out that the upcoming Reeves Batman film is expected to release in 2027, and releasing two Batman films simultaneously would be counterproductive. He went on to say that DC is creating a strategy to ensure these two films don't conflict with each other, so the fact that he hasn't talked with James Gunn might simply mean it's not high priority, because this isn't going in front of the cameras anytime soon at all, which should ease some concerns. Now, I am though going to point to one thing that does, well, for me, raise a red flag. Muschietti said in one of these interviews, and I quote, "There are good intentions for now." And this to me does suggest that he is growing frustrated and maybe even a bit insecure about the Batman Brave and the Bold and the lack of communication with the head of the studio. I don't work in Hollywood, I don't know how things work, but being ghosted is probably something that's really common in a Hollywood environment, and not hearing back from your potential boss about a project, well, even for me, that would indicate I'm not working on the project, and I think that's something Muschietti is considering at this point. Now, I want to be clear, Batman is one of the critical pieces for the DCU, and should they screw this up, it's going to have long-reaching implications. Muschietti is a great filmmaker, but I don't think The Flash was his best project. I still would like to see what he has in store for Batman Brave and the Bold, and honestly guys, at this point, I think it's going to be such a long time before we find out anything concrete. I would be very wary of believing any rumors that come down the pipe. We're probably going to have more of the Dark Knight than we can handle in just a few years, but until this starts to unfold, we're all just going to have to continue to be patient. Now, before you take off, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, ring that bell for all the updates, and make sure you get every notification, because we do daily Marvel and DC content, and we don't want you to miss any news.